So, you want to learn how to handstand. That's amazing because this skill is probably my favorite one I've ever learned. And I am so excited to teach you the best way to do it. Because there are definitely some things I wish I'd known before I started, and some things I would have done differently. So, without further ado, let's learn how to handstand. The two major areas of strength you'll need for handstand are your wrists and shoulders. A lot of people think you also need core strength for handstand, but that's just not true. Think about it. When you're in a handstand, your torso is in a vertical position straight up and down, just like when you're standing on your feet, but flipped. You already have enough core strength to keep your torso upright when you're standing on your feet, so you have enough to keep your torso rigid in a handstand too. When you're standing on your feet, the main muscles keeping you from falling over are in your ankles and hips. They keep your body weight centered over the base of support formed by your feet. You're probably pretty good at balancing on your feet, so you might not notice this on a daily basis, but if you try to stand on one foot, you might notice the muscles around your ankle making tiny little micro movements to keep your weight centered over your foot. Your hip might also be involved, but its main job is to stay strong and rigid and maybe make larger movements to keep you from falling over if you really lose your balance. When you're standing on your hands, your wrists will be making all those little movements your ankles normally make to keep you standing, and your shoulders will be activated to keep your arms stable. If you want to, you can train your wrists and shoulders outside of your handstand practice with accessory exercises like wrist curls, overhead press, or any other exercises that train these areas. However, this isn't really that necessary. Your wrists and shoulders will strengthen in the ways they need to for handstand if you practice handstands enough. So, how should you actually train to learn how to handstand? Some people think you should start by handstanding against a wall. I do not recommend this for a few reasons. The first reason is that entering a handstand and holding a handstand are two different skills. Holding a handstand requires you to stay as still as possible, while entering a handstand requires you to move into that perfectly balanced position. Using a wall allows you to practice only that balancing part and not the entry part. Eventually, you will be able to balance in a handstand, but you won't be able to do so away from the wall until you actually learn how. By practicing away from the wall to start with, you'll learn both skills simultaneously, which saves you time. But let's address one more thing that might be making you hesitant to start learning handstands away from the wall: the fear of falling. Thankfully, there are only two very easy skills you need to learn to never have to worry about hurting yourself from falling out of a handstand. The first one is cartwheeling out. In this method, you fall to the side toward one hand and bend at the waist to land on the foot closest to the hand you're falling toward, then bring the other leg down. If you already know how to do a cartwheel, you're set because this is just half a cartwheel. If not, learning to cartwheel will actually help you with your handstands, since a cartwheel is just a handstand you hold for a very short time. The second exit method is falling into wheel pose. This method is a bit more difficult than the last, but thankfully you shouldn't need to use it most of the time, since it's pretty easy to direct your fall to the side and just cartwheel out. However, you should know how to do it just in case you fall forward and can't stop yourself. All you have to do is arch your back as you're falling, trying to bring your butt and your feet closer to your head and prepare to land on your feet. It's okay if you land very hard. You won't hurt your feet. but you will hurt your back if you land flat on your butt. So lift your belly and your booty to the sky and just let your feet take your whole weight. Make sure you bend your arms a little bit, but not too much so your head doesn't hit the ground. And extend your neck to look behind you through your arms. Make sure you try wheel pose by itself before trying to fall into it from handstand, and focus on lifting your hips up and looking through your arms. If you're still scared to try it, you can use a stack of blocks or mats or a table to practice falling from less of a height. Just make sure whatever surface you fall onto is secured and won't move. You can even try just hopping your feet in wheel pose to get used to the feeling of landing on them. So now that you know how to get out of a handstand, let's talk about how to get into one. You might have a particular image in your head already about how you're supposed to enter a handstand. However, there are actually a lot of different ways to do it, and I'm going to go over all the ways I recommend for beginners to try. Practicing different methods will help you develop strength, coordination, and muscle memory faster by challenging your body in different ways. The first method is the straight leg kick up. This is probably the method you envisioned when you first thought of what getting into a handstand would look like. You start with your hands up, then as you bring them down, you kick one leg over your head, then bring the other one to meet it. Despite being the most common, I think this method is pretty difficult and kind of advanced. You have to use just the right amount of force to get your body to land stacked in a perfect line. But it's still a good method to learn, and it's very accessible because it doesn't require any additional mobility. A similar method is the split up, where you start with your hands already on the ground and one leg lifted over your head. Then you lean forward to transfer your weight over your hands and float your bottom leg. Finally, you lift your bottom leg to meet the top one. This is definitely what I would consider to be the easiest entry method if you have the mobility for it. It allows you to almost fully stack your body over your wrists to begin with, and lets you take your time finding that balance point before going for the full handstand. Make sure to go slow with this one. You can just practice floating that bottom leg until you get comfortable on your hands before even attempting to lift it. If you don't have enough mobility to lift your leg all the way over your head, you can still practice this method, but it will be a bit harder since you'll have to kick up a little bit instead of just leaning forward. The next method is the tuck up or donkey kicks. To do this, you'll start with your hands on the ground and your feet together. Then bend your knees and hop, trying to get your hips over your shoulders and kick your butt. This method is great because you can easily hop over and over, getting closer and closer to that balance point and trying to hang just a little longer each time. It's also easier to find your balance with your legs tucked in. Then you can extend them after you feel comfortable. The next method will be familiar from earlier in the video: the cartwheel. If you already know how to cartwheel, try to practice cartwheels more and more slowly, trying to hang out in the handstand part longer and longer each time. If you don't know how to cartwheel, now is your chance to learn. Just bend sideways, place your hands next to your closest foot, kick the other foot over your head, then follow with the other foot, and exit the same way you would cartwheel out of a handstand. This method is intuitive and an awesome option for people who already know how to cartwheel. The last method will be familiar to you if you do yoga. the hop from downward dog. If you've taken a yoga class before, you've probably hopped from downward dog to the front of the mat, usually as part of sun salutations. But you may or may not know that there is actually a handstand version of this hop. As a beginner, you can start practicing this entry method by just trying to do a larger hop from downward dog. Every time you jump, try to lift your feet higher and keep them hovering longer before letting them land on the mat. Eventually, you should be able to jump to a pike handstand and hold it. From there, you can attempt to lift your legs over your head and hold there. Before, of course, lowering your feet back to the mat with control. This is an amazing method for yogis because you get to train handstands every single time you do a yoga class. And it works no matter what level you're at, even if you can just barely hover your feet for a second. It's also a great prep for harder handstand skills like presses. As a bonus, you can also practice your tuck up handstand entry during sun salutations each time you jump back into chaturanga. So now you know how to get into a handstand, but what should you know about holding one once you're there? Well, just like there are many ways to enter a handstand, there are also many ways to stand there. You're probably most familiar with the straight handstand, but this isn't the only way to do it.
There is also the gay handstand, but I couldn't get anyone at the gym to demonstrate it with me, so it looks like this.
The straight handstand is actually one of the most difficult handstand variations. It's definitely a great skill to have, but you don't have to start with it if you don't want to. Any straight leg variation where your legs are apart will be easier. There's the split handstand where your legs are apart front to back, and the straddle handstand where your legs are apart to the side. And you don't have to have this much mobility to do these variations, but the more mobility you have, the easier they will be. Bent leg handstands are even easier than straight leg handstands. There's the double stag, which is the bent leg version of the split handstand, and there's the tuck handstand. Which handstand you personally find easiest will depend on your specific body proportions. But I find the double stag to be the easiest since you can use both the teeter-totter motion and bending and straightening your legs to adjust your balance and keep yourself from falling. Regardless of which handstand you're doing, you should focus on a few different points of technique. Think about clawing your fingers so that instead of being flat on the ground, they're spread apart and gripping the floor. Your hands should also be ever so slightly turned out so your pointer fingers point directly forward. Try to keep your arms locked straight, though micro bending to save your balance is okay. If you're doing a handstand where your back is straight up and down, like the straight, straddle, and tuck handstands, you should think about trying to push your shoulders up like you're trying to cover your ears. If your back is more curved, like in double stag or split handstands, then you can let your shoulders drop and open through your chest. However you practice your handstands, your goal should be to do them as much as possible. Ideally, you would do them every single day for at least 15 minutes or so. This skill really does benefit from as much practice as possible. Think about a baby learning to stand on their feet for the first time. How long do you think it would take them if they only practiced for like 5 minutes a day, 3 days a week? Yeah, that baby would probably not be a baby anymore by the time it learned to stand, much less walk. Instead, they try over and over and practice constantly, and that's what allows them to learn in months rather than years. And that's what you should do too if you want to learn how to stand on your hands. A strategy I liked when I was learning was just to do handstands randomly throughout my day whenever I thought of it. Waiting for my food to warm up in the microwave? Handstands. Need to grab something on the other side of the room? Walk there in a handstand. Want to go grab a snack from the kitchen? Better do 5 handstands first to earn it. And it helps that handstands are just really fun to do whenever and wherever. I used to have a tradition where whenever I would go someplace new, I would take a picture of myself doing a handstand there. So get creative with it, have fun, just do your handstands. Okay, I hope you're excited to start practicing because I know I am. I've been doing handstands for years and I still think they are hands down the best and most fun skill I have ever learned. I have the best idea ever. Let's go and do some handstands together right now. No excuses. Let's go wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Stand up, put your hands on the ground, put your feet in the air. Let's do some handstands. May the gains be with you and remember that you're really cool. Bye.